not only out of sincere obedience to His Eminence, but also out of filial devotion to my spiritual father, the ever-memorable Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Etna, who cherished an especially ardent love for and veneration of St. John, I am happy to accept this kind invitation. I invoke the prayers of both Metropolitans as I now seek to extol this great luminary of the 20th century, who is in truth one of the greatest saints of our entire Orthodox Church. Although there is much that one could say about a multifaceted personality like St. John, I wish to place particular emphasis on 2 points. First, that St. John belongs to all Orthodox Christians throughout the world, not only to those baptized, whether as infants or as adult converts in the Russian Orthodox milieu, and secondly, that he was a fervent advocate, both in word and in deed, of education, or I should say Orthodox education, because not much of what goes on in schools these days is genuine education. After his consecration to the episcopacy in 1934 and his subsequent arrival in Shanghai, St. John strove to make peace among all of the Orthodox Christians who found themselves in that city, including Serbs, Greeks, and Ukrainians. There's a charming anecdote about how he used his remarkable gift of discernment to bring under his homophorion a Ukrainian priest aligned with a separatist Ukrainian church by simply telling him that he was a true Ukrainian himself, with a long line of ancestors in Ukraine. This was, of course, entirely accurate, since the Holy Hierarch was born in the village of Adamovka in the county of Kharkov in present-day Ukraine. I should add, by way of clarification, that while St. John was always firmly loyal to the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, he was well able to see beyond jurisdictional confines to the deeper unity of all true Orthodox Christians. And thus it was that there were no separate Orthodox jurisdictions while he was Bishop of Shanghai. It would indeed be fair to say that his episcopal activity in China foreshadowed our own Church of the genuine Orthodox Christians of Greece, which now encompasses such a wonderful array of nationalities: Greek, Russian, Ukrainian, Georgian, Romanian, Bulgarian, Serbian, Ossetian, Czech, Slovak, Polish, Italian, Sardinian, Swiss, French, Belgium, German, Austrian, Swedish, English, American, Syrian, Egyptian, Canadian, Mexican, Guatemalan, Haitian, Cuban, Colombian, Brazilian, and Australian, New Zealander, Indonesian, Malaysian, Singaporean, Congolese, Kenyan, Ugandan, Nigerian, and Zambian. And this is in stark contrast to the so-called official Orthodox churches, which, despite their declarations of ecumenical love, are bedeviled by an unhealthy, introverted nationalism and infantile arguments over preeminence and primacy. True Christian love embraces and welcomes the exile and stranger, and likewise, it exalts others and humbles itself, seeking not its own. St. John was noted for being a staunch supporter of the Greek Old Calendarists at a time when they existed in almost total isolation and were sorely in need of episcopal leadership. Already in mid-1957, he was in contact with our church and expressed support for us and his readiness, if need be, to undertake consecrations of our clergy candidates. St. John appealed to the Synod of Bishops to come to the aid of our struggling church in Greece by providing us with new hierarchs for the continuance of our mission. Although he did not himself take part in the consecrations performed by Archbishop Leonti of Chile and 3 other hierarchs of the Russian Orthodox Church abroad in Detroit, Athens, or New York, he consistently defended his dear spiritual friend, Archbishop Leonti, who, like him, was a fearless confessor of true orthodoxy, especially when the latter was taken to task by Metropolitan Anastasi for supposed insubordination to the Holy Synod and transgression of the canons. It is noteworthy that Archbishop Leonti reciprocated this support when he stood firm by St. John, literally and figuratively, when the latter was shamefully and wrongly taken to trial by some of his faithful in San Francisco. During the 11 years that St. John spent, initially in Paris and later in Brussels as Archbishop of the Diocese of Western Europe, he would liturgize in French and Dutch in order to serve the spiritual and pastoral needs of converts that he had brought to Orthodoxy through the formation of indigenous Orthodox communities in France and Holland. He would subsequently also serve in English after he relocated to America. While in Europe, St. John assiduously collected information about the pre-schism saints of the West, who are, or rather used to be, honored by the West, but had been forgotten in the East. On his recommendation, their veneration was restored, and their names were were entered once more into the ecclesiastical calendar. It would, in fact, be no exaggeration to say that these Orthodox saints of the West are now honored much more fervently and with far greater piety in the Church of the East, and this, in no small measure, redounds to the glory of St. John. St. John's emphasis on the universality and ecumenicity of Orthodoxy and his great work of renewing the veneration of the pre-schism saints is now being faithfully continued in our own day by Metropolitan Demetrios and Metropolitan Cyprian of Oropos and Phili. As many of you now know, Metropolitan Demetrios has obtained the relics of the holy monk martyr Clare, or Claros, the enlightener of Normandy, and rescued his memory from oblivion, with the result that the saint, in obvious gratitude, has worked a number of astounding miracles. For his part, Metropolitan Cyprian is actively promoting the veneration of the pre-schism saints of Sweden and the rest of Scandinavia, and in addition, the saints of Germany and Austria, leading pilgrimages to their shrines and composing services in their honor. Turning now to St. John's contributions to education, let me remind you that he studied law in Kharkov, for which he received a diploma in 1918. In the wake of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, he emigrated with his family to Yugoslavia. He studied theology at the St. Sava School of Theology at the University of Belgrade and received his diploma there in 1925. After being tonsured a monk and ordained to the priesthood, St. John served as an instructor of religion at a Serbian high school. And in 1929, he was assigned to the seminary of St. John the Theologian in the city of Bitol, which belongs to the Diocese of Ohrid. St. John made a lasting impression on the seminarians, not only through his erudition, but also, and even more importantly, through his intense ascetical life and his daily attendance at the Divine Liturgy. There's a delightful vignette about his time at the Bitol Seminary, where at nights he showed loving care for each student. He would straighten the pillow of one and the blanket of another. As he left the room, he would bless the sleeping students with the sign of the cross and depart without making a single noise. It is clear from the foregoing how much importance St. John ascribed to theological education as a means of training future priests. Although the saint did not have the opportunity to establish a seminary as such, during the final phase of his episcopal activity as Archbishop of Western America in San Francisco, he initiated a series of theological courses, open to both men and women, with the assistance of Bishop Nectari of Seattle and the local clergy. The curriculum included liturgics, patristics, Old Testament, New Testament, apologetics, church history, pastoral theology, church singing, and Russian literature. The future father, and now Saint, Seraphim of Platina, attended these courses with great enthusiasm, and St. John, discerning his superior intellectual and spiritual qualities, accorded Father Seraphim special attention and fostered his theological development. Without question, the saint's educational program bore abundant fruit in Father Seraphim, chief among which would have to be the formation of the St. Herman of Alaska Brotherhood, the publication of the Orthodox Word, which was undertaken with the saint's blessing and close supervision, as well as St. Seraphim of Platina's own continuation of St. John's legacy, including his universal outlook, his promotion of Orthodox education, and his own support for the Church of the Genuine Orthodox Christians of Greece. There is, of course, much more that could be said even about just these two aspects of St. John, but I hope that I've conveyed something of the importance of his universal Orthodox outlook and his promotion of Orthodox education, both of which must concern every conscientious believer in these dark times. If I may paraphrase St. Cosmas, without Orthodox schools, we walk in darkness. Thankfully, our saint fortifies us for our duties by his extraordinary life and works, his continuing miraculous interventions, and his relics, vestments, and church implements, all of which serve as vivid reminders of a luminous paradigm of orthodoxy. By his heavenly intercessions, may we all fight the good fight for the preservation and witness of the Orthodox faith, for the unity of the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, and for the continuing formation, education, and adornment of our souls with the godly knowledge and virtues that grant us entry into the heavenly banquet of our Lord's kingdom. I thank His Eminence for trusting me with the honor of speaking today about St. John. May our saint bless him and the brotherhood established in his honor with length of days in salvation. Vuit Iamas Oios Ioannis.